World War II is the focal point of 20th century history, and Hitler's downfall left us with the world that we have today. Today on Radio Free History, we're going to take a deep look. We're going to see what's true, and we're going to see what's maybe better classified as the popular myth.
I keep coming back to reading this part of the story. This is between when Hitler comes to power and when the war starts, when he invades Poland and war is declared between France and Britain and Germany, and the whole shit show, is kicked off. And again, everybody is burned from World War I. The French don't want to fight, the British public doesn't want to fight, the Americans don't want to fight. Nobody wants to fucking fight, except Hitler. And that's more or less how things develop. But before we get to that, we're going to get to the build-up. First thing Hitler does after he comes to power is he systematically undermines every institution that could possibly stop him. You guys might remember from the last podcast the Kapt Push in the 1920s. This was a military putsch against the Weimar Republic, and it failed because the trade unions declared a general strike. What happened to the trade unions? Well, Hitler understood that pageantry was a lot more important to your average worker than the actual institutions that ensured his protection, or are supposed to.
Yeah, I was reading that there was something like 90,000 members of the big trade union in Berlin. 90,000 people are not going to respond to rational arguments. 90,000 people are going to respond to slogans and pageantry.
Well, and that's what Hitler gave them. He went on, he gave them a glorious May Day. It's May Day, not Labor Day in Europe, for anybody who's, North America bound. They gave him a big May Day parade, and he said, "Workers, your institutions are sacred to us." And, forever, you're the strength of the country, and just built them up and was kissing babies and the whole everything a politician needs to do to celebrate the worker.
It doesn't take much to win over the common man, but it does take something.
Yeah, exactly. And they got pageantry, and they thought, okay, this is a guy who gets us and respects what we do. And that's why nobody did anything when he occupied the trade union buildings and confiscated all the union funds and replaced them with Nazi organizations that were there to do whatever management said. He said, "I'm finally restoring the rightful manager. No longer is the union the boss. Now, finally, the manager is the boss again." So this is, again, a kind of nod to the people that funded Hitler coming up and the people he, needed to run his system. And anyway, so that's the first thing. And then later on, he did the same thing to the Catholic trade unions, who did nothing when he did it to the non-Catholic trade unions. So it's very weird. They just kind of quite quietly, in a very German way, waited their turn. Mm-hmm. And some of the union funds eventually funded the German rearmament plan. So that's what happened to the workers. Hitler ran a bunch of schemes. The Volkswagen is first and foremost. He goes to the German worker and he says, guys, I got a great deal for you. If you pay in advance in installments, I will build the people's car, and you'll all get a car. The second one's available. Now, none of them were available. This was a big car plant that he built that ended up making, war stuff. Mm-hmm. How did the other big institution? This is the thing that really people, this is the thing that people that haven't studied this really ask questions about, is what happened to the proud German Prussian military with their own proud traditions. They're a state within a state. They got rid of the Kaiser. They did some math. They figured out we can't win World War I. They got rid of the Kaiser, and they put the Weimar in charge, or the Weimar Republic, in charge of the country. What happened? Well, Hitler knew he had to undermine the officer caste. So the first thing he did is he got all these kids, put them in the Hitler Youth, and then there was a natural transition for a lot of these indoctrinated kids into the army. So in the young officers, it was very politic to be a neo-Nazi. So you were promoted very quickly.
Yeah, people think that you change society by making the best argument and convincing everyone. No, you change society by getting a hold of the next generation.
Yep, the hand that rocks the cradle. And Hitler was rocking the fuck out of that cradle. He had the kids basically, with the SS, or not with the Hitler Youth. he had them out away from their parents, working on public works projects, keeping them out of trouble and giving them work experience that later helped, prep them to be part of a war machine. And at the same time, these kids are being taught ideology, and if their parents have anything bad to say about it, they're encouraged to rat their parents out.
Yeah, I'm just going to chime something in here. This is the time in history when, instead of saying, you're trying to serve the king, this is when you say you're trying to serve the country. Back in ancient Rome, nobody wanted to serve Rome, they wanted to serve Caesar.
Exactly. Basically, you had a group of people who were psychologically and culturally religiously conditioned to follow the rules. Yeah. And then there was you have to govern themselves, and they didn't want to. It wasn't their job, but their job was to do whatever they were doing at the best they could do. And whatever. What happened to this army, this powerful army? How did Hitler undermine this institution and take total power? Well, one of it, like we said, is he flooded the lower ranks with Nazi officers who were quickly promoted, especially as the army. Remember, when Hitler took power, the army was limited to 100,000 volunteers. They weren't allowed to conscript. They weren't allowed to do any of that. So as the army grew, a lot of Nazis got into very prominent positions, and that created a base where they couldn't trust their troops. They couldn't necessarily, even if a general from the old school wanted to oppose Hitler later on, that would be really difficult to do. He wouldn't be sure of the loyalty of his own men. But the first thing Hitler did is one of the generals that he wanted to get rid of is he accused of homosexuality. So it was ironic, given that the SS at this point, the SA at this point, was run by a gaggle of gay men that were fighting, and it was a scandal that they were using the SS to get to scour the country for appropriate lovers for them at one point.
See, these days that would get you a promotion in there.
Exactly.
Times change.
Yeah, they do. But so he accused him of this. He rounds up, this scumbag who blackmails, guys for being homosexual. He has this guy accuse this general of doing that, and the general is so embarrassed that he steps down to be able to fight this full time. And he knows that men will never respect this general again because he's, very publicly implied he's gay. The second general that Hitler wanted to bump off, he found out he had married a girl who had been a prostitute. And according to the very Protestant German officer caste, that was a no-no. And this word got out, and there were dancers from cabarets calling up the army office and being like, "Oh, congratulations for accepting one of our scumbags into your ranks."
You got to put the kibosh on this, otherwise the Germans might become a country full of perverts, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and speaking of unusual things that come out of Germany, the officer who tells the guy that he's going to be charged with disgracing the officer corps by marrying this prostitute, he hands him a gun. And so, okay, do the honorable thing. Kill yourself. So
you know what to do.
There's a Japanese undercurrent in their call, where it's death on the battlefield, and that's a big deal in terms of their culture and values. So the army, it's been undermined. It's full of Nazis. Nobody can really trust each other. And again, the army really they want Hitler. Hitler's promised to rebuild the army, this proud tradition, and there's going to be lots of jobs and lots of promotions in a growing army. So he had a lot of support from the army. In terms of the press, they took it over completely. There's a series of propaganda reasons given for doing it, and the press became just a drone of Nazi propaganda. It got to the point where the Germans just basically stopped reading the newspapers and just stopped listening to the radio shows. It was the same thing over and over again. They knew it was going to, and they just stopped, tuned out, most of them. But a portion of them did not tune out, and I'm sure we're livid, just as we see today. The people who are clinging to whatever this media source or that, begging for that. And so what does Hitler do? Well, he realizes, I don't have enough Germans. I'm going to start expanding. And the first thing he looks at is his home, Austria. He says, Austria, we should be united. And the way he goes about uniting the country is he funds Nazi terrorists in Austria to kill their prime minister. He's winning hearts and minds, this Hitler. And eventually, he threatens Austria. He makes other countries come, and the other countries, Britain and France, and everybody says, "Okay, look, if we let you take over Austria, if we let this Anschluss happen, will that be enough?" Hitler swears, "Yes, that'll be it. All I want to do is unite the German people. Just let me deal with Austria. Let me unite these two Germanic nations as they should be, and we'll be happy, and we'll move forward from there." It's kind of, it's one of the ironies of history. It must have been quite a scene when they took over Austria. It was this Nazi SS. Remember, this wasn't the SS yet. This wasn't the German army per se that went in there. This was Hitler's goon squad. This was Hitler's homosexual street fighting goon squad that went in there, and they went into the Rothschild Palace and was just carting off loot. They gathered up the Jews and made them clean the toilets and made them do degrading things. Some of the wealthier Jews, about half the population, was able to buy its way to Switzerland and then on to the West in many cases, as we found out when we went to university. Move forward from there. So, he's taken Austria, but that's not enough. He does something that, again, if anyone's been paying attention to the news the last 10 years or so, this is going to be a tactic that sounds very familiar. Hitler starts saying, "Guys, there's ethnic Germans in these other countries, and they're being terrorized. And I have to step in to protect these ethnic Germans, the Volksdeutsche." The Volksdeutsche, by and large, were actually doing pretty well, but again, Hitler had total control of the press. So the press is full in Germany of these atrocity stories that are a lot about castration. That was something that came up again and again. You talk about cultural residues, but that's something that Hitler really was obsessed with and really pushed.
There's something very visceral about sexual imagery. That's one of the few things that's universal to our species.
Yeah, you're really getting down. And one of Hitler's propaganda points was the simpler, the more accessible.
Yep.
So that's another thing we should be very, very mindful of in the modern age. Is the simpler a propaganda, the simpler a piece of information, the more people can access it. The more people can interface with it. More people will interface with pro wrestling than will interface with Shakespeare.
Well, note how you say the simpler a piece of information. You didn't say the more correct that piece of information. Nope. That's something to keep in mind when you're looking around the world right now.
Yep. No, 100%. So the other nations get together. What are we going to do with Germany, the problem child? Well, maybe if we just let them take the Sudetenland, if we let them take the portions that are mostly ethnic German anyway, he'll be happy. Peace will be preserved, and the only people who are getting fucked over are these other small nations that we really don't care about anyway. They've just come out in post-World War I. They're mostly weak. They're squabbling, and we'll let Hitler eat a few of these guys. We'll divvy up the spoils like hyenas to the other powers that haven't been eaten yet, and we'll keep moving forward. So Hitler keeps eating and getting more and more territory, and finally gets to Poland. Poland is run by a junta of borderline retarded generals. That's what is Polish democracy quickly degenerated into that. And these guys are not fucking having it. The other generals were, the other people who were running their countries, they were more or less saying, these guys were statesmen. These guys were politicians. They were like, no, we won't let, Hitler, march over us. We're going to let Hitler march over us because the alternative is we're all going to die with this war machine. Now, the war machine, funnily enough, was in the process of being created and wasn't nearly as powerful until the eventual attack on Poland as Hitler, propaganda led everybody to believe. So there was a pretty good chance if a few of these nations, I think it was the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, that if they had been allowed to fight or if they had decided to fight, they might have been able to hold Germany off. But, they were fortified, they had 35 Czech divisions. This was another opportunity where, hey, if they'd fought, they might have rolled them back. When before all this, though, Hitler crossed into the Rhineland. So there had been an agreement that Germany had to demilitarize the eastern part of Germany. Hitler took his very small symbolic army and marched into these lands, and nobody wanted to fight him.
Yeah.
Had they used force there, and that would have been a police action, that would have toppled them. According to the people inside, that was all they would have needed for some of the generals that were still getting beaten down and still cared about Germany to have off them, or to have put them, made them, responsible to one body or another that they came up with in the quarter.
It's amazing how much less appetite there is for a fight when you've just had a world war that decimated your population a decade earlier, right?
Yeah, exactly. And nobody wanted to fight, and everybody was willing to give up whatever they could to prevent another war, except for Poland. Poland wouldn't give a fucking inch in their credit. They had basically no guns. There was nobody who could help them except for Russia, and they were not having any Russian troops. They would not even talk to the Russians to negotiate. The troops marching through and aiding them. They wanted no Russian troops on their soil. They were going to stand their ground. They were going to fight.
Now, you have a lot of Slavic heritage. Would you trust the Russians?
No.
No, we wouldn't.
No, I wouldn't trust anyone east of the fucking Danube. It's a very harsh part of the world. The culture is, not Western. And it's, I guess, and yeah, you really don't want to be down there. If you guys want an illustration of the difference between our culture and Slavic culture, okay, there's this guy Charlie V, okay? This is a guy, he's maybe schizophrenic or something. He goes around just punching random people and videotaping it, and then putting the videotapes of him punching these people on YouTube. If you just Google it, I know it sounds bizarre, but it's there. He did this relatively safely for 10 years or so in the West, in California. He's walking up hitting people. He never really got beat up. Then he went on vacation to Eastern Europe, and just Google the pictures of him after trying his shtick. East of Germany, and it was not, it was very, anyway, just one example. Anyway, so he's moving. So Poland is going to fight. Now, this doesn't go very well for Poland. Poland is a tiny country. Poland is flat. Poland still has cavalry with lances. Sure. That was one fight, as they sent a tank brigade against a bunch of cavaliers with lances, and I'm sure the little wings out the back, they got blown to pieces. But they fought, and they were the first guys to really fight and stand their ground, and props to them for that. Hitler moves in, took over again, but again, why was this enabled? Well, it was enabled because Hitler had made a secret agreement with Stalin. And this said basically, okay, Monsieur Stalin, you need German know-how to industrialize. You need German technology to build your army. You need German craftsmanship. You need German goods. We need raw resources, and we need space to rearm, because remember, we're under the Versailles Treaty. We're not supposed to be rearming. So all of Hitler's tank schools, all of Hitler's Luftwaffe stuff, that was tested in two places. One of them was Russia, and the other one was the Spanish Civil War. Those are the two places where a lot of this technology was tested pre-Poland. Now, Stalin, a funny little aside here, sent his generals, his best generals, to watch the German troops and the training and the tank schools and everything, and get as much information as they could about the German military. And then he decided that, wait a minute, these guys might have been influenced by the Nazis, and liquidated all of them. Now, these guys would have been pretty useful, I think, given what happens later in the war. But anyway, so that's the reason he's so confident. He's already got an agreement. We're going to divide up Eastern Europe between him and Stalin. We're going to respect each other's spheres of influence. And you guys are going to do you. We're going to do us. We're going to have a very complex trade agreement that's going to allow me to get goods despite a naval embargo from Britain. And
the sad thing about that agreement is that Western intellectuals loved Stalin even as he was killing millions of his own people, but it was creating a secret alliance with Hitler and proving that Uncle Stalin wasn't just going to be a puppet of the American intellectuals. Yep. That was the last straw that they weren't going to trust this guy no more.
Yep, exactly.
Killing 20 million peasants.
That's weirdly cozy with Stalin. Orwell talks about that too. There's a weird, it's if you want to get creeped out, guys, just look at how cozy some people were with Uncle Stalin during, this period of our history where he was in power and being a monster.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's moving on from Uncle Stalin. So Poland gets crushed. The Russians say we got to go in to preserve order because the Polish government's collapsed. They end up taking their piece of Poland. And it becomes, but then because Poland had a treaty with France and Britain saying if you attack, we're going to meet force with force. So now Poland's been crushed in a few weeks, but they're now at war with Britain and France. But nobody wants to fight. The French don't want to fight. They're sitting in the Maginot Line. They're watching the Germans build fortifications, win range of their guns, and they're just sitting there. Almost nothing happened. It was sometimes called the Sitzkrieg.
I haven't heard that, but I like that.
I just didn't. Nobody did anything for a little bit. Hitler was trying to make peace at this point. He goes, guys, we're at war, but we, really, what's there to fight about? Poland's done. Poland will never come back. Are you really going to pick a fight with me over Poland? It was already out, and they said yes, we're going to keep fighting. Hitler said okay, and the Germans, again, they're a very specific people. And ever since World War I, their engineers have been working on the perfect machine to destroy France. Absolutely perfect for tailor-made for that purpose. That's what they did. They massed tanks for the first time in history. They realized, and again, this is fairly simple math. I don't want to make this inaccessible for people with dyscalculia or whatever, but the more tanks you have in one place, the more fire you can put forward, the less your enemy has to shoot back at you. So it goes into ratios, regardless. If you mass your tanks, they're more effective than if you spread them out. So the French had all their tanks, the same number of tanks. The French had all their tanks spread out. And the Germans said, no, fuck it. And they punched through with a whole bunch of tanks at a weak spot in the Maginot Line, or several of them, and proceeded to be, to Paris in a few weeks. Now the French, again, had horrible memories of fucking Bismarck shelling Paris. They consider their capital,
and World War I.
And World War I, and they consider their capital a work of art, and their national treasure, and they were, had no more reserves left. They didn't feel they could do anything against this mechanized juggernaut, and they surrendered. And yet Vichy France formed, and became a whole. At least they managed to keep their navy out of Hitler's hands. They went and they scuttled their navy before Hitler was able to eventually use it later in the war. Tried to use it later in the war, but. And give that one to him. We'll talk about the French resistance a tiny bit later, an appropriate bit later.
It's kind of sad because the French actually do have a pretty good and honorable military history, but going 0-3 against the Germans is just giving them the reputation.
Well, it's just, they can't fight defensively. The French are an army that can fight offensively very, very well, can't seem to fight defensively at all. The Russians, exactly the opposite. They can fight defensively very, very well. They cannot fight offensively very, very well. And this brings us to the next kind of important part of the story, and this is the Winter War. So Stalin says, fuck these Finns. These Finns are Finland. These Finns have been independent long enough. I'm just going to march fucking Russians in, and we're going to take them over, and it's going to be amazing. And Finland took that personally. Basically, I don't know if you guys know anything about Finland, but these are big people, and they can ski, and they can hunt. And they hunt rabbits, and they're very, very good shots. And a lot of them showed up in their militia groups and said, we're going to hunt communists. Yeah. And they proceeded just with rifles, pick off. They had trouble with the Russian armored divisions, but they figured out, hey guys, we just ski up behind them and shove a Molotov cocktail, which is where the term comes from. The Russian general attacking was Molotov, so the gasoline bombs they made to throw at tank air intakes were called the Molotov cocktails. If you're curious about the origin of that term, it comes from the Winter War. Now, despite the Russia's numerical advantage, they really have a really tough time. And eventually they have to mobilize and send in so many troops that it's a complete fucking embarrassment.
Well, there was that one sniper who killed like 500 people, right?
Yeah, and they asked him, what was it like to have killed that many people? He goes, I don't know, I only killed commies.
People had much more of a way with words back then.
They did. And people had a better way with communists back then.
Yeah, fair enough.
That was more appropriate. So that happened. Basically, this convinced Germany that Russia was a non-threat militarily. He was like, if they couldn't deal with the Finns, they're not dealing with me. They're done. He called it. He said they're a rotting edifice. We need only to kick in the door, and the whole structure will collapse. Now, why is he doing this? Well, this was his plan from the beginning. If you read Mein Kampf, he wanted his Lebensraum in the east. He wanted his breathing space in the east, and he thought that was the logical place for Germany to expand. He really didn't want colonies. He didn't want to be all over the world like Britain. He wanted to conquer the good parts of Russia and move Germans in.
Well, even the few colonies Germany had, they'd lost in World War One.
He didn't care. When they got it back, he said, like when he was trying to negotiate peace with the Britons, he said, "Yes, we'd like our colonies back, but that's not an issue. That's not the key issue here. You got to make peace."
Cameroon and Tanzania, like, are you going to throw away everything to babysit two random African countries?
Yeah, exactly. So they went there, but there was, Hitler could not wrap his head around British mentality, and he could not wrap his head around the American mentality. He knew Germans very, very well. He understood the zeitgeist, the working people. He understood arguably some of the other ethnicities that he'd rubbed up against in Vienna as a homeless guy, but he really couldn't wrap his head around the British. So he tries to make peace. He offers to guarantee the British Empire. He says, if anybody acts up, India, Arab world, just send us over. Send us in. We're going to send German troops, the best troops in the world, the guys that just fucked up your buddy France. We'll send them in to guarantee the empire. And Churchill says, Russian sheep, go fuck yourself. And he gives a very famous speech about fighting them on the beaches and the landing ground. And the battle for France begins. Now this brings us to Dunkirk. You had the British Expeditionary Force. So this is most of their heavy equipment and a lot of their soldiers. And they ended up getting chased onto a peninsula called Dunkirk with a busted up harbor. And then the Germans stopped. And no one's entirely sure why they stopped. The records are that the Air Force was fighting with the ground force to say, no, we want to be the ones to finish them off, and the Air Force and the ground force was saying, no, the tanks must go in to finish them off. That's one idea. Now the other idea is Hitler really wanted to extend an olive branch to Britain, which is exactly what he was trying to do at that point. And he allowed the evacuation. And again, this also speaks to the German mentality. Now what Hitler understands very well. What Hitler doesn't understand, Hitler does not understand at all. And he can't possibly understand how they could evacuate all these people in 3 days. That's just outside of Hitler's wheelhouse. And they do it. There are civilian boats going back and forth. There are every transport they can get their hand on is just taking people off the beaches, and they actually managed to evacuate everybody. There's 200,000, some ridiculous number of people they got off the beaches, but they lost a lot of equipment. And that was again a very serious blow. In many ways, it's easier sometimes to replace people than equipment in wars. Ask Napoleon.
Ask Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, that's exactly. I hope we don't have to ask Xi. So that comes there, and Hitler says, okay, I got an idea. The only reason Britain is fighting me, the only reason that they are not making peace is they still hope I'm gonna fight Russia, and Uncle Stalin's gonna come in and they're gonna be rescued, and we're gonna bleed each other out, and it's gonna be a Holocaust. And but if I just destroy Russia and kill most of the Russians in the West, I can just, they'll lose all hope, and then they'll have to acknowledge me. And they'll have to, I'll get my Lebensraum, which I want anyway, and the British will lose all hope, and they'll have to acknowledge me as master of the European continent.
Well, and the thing is, it's not even like Hitler wanted to eventually take Britain. He very clearly says in Mein Kampf that if he defeats Britain, the Americans are going to rule the world, and he doesn't exactly want that. Yeah.
But this brings us back to Operation Sea Lion. Because I'm sure there's people screaming at their freaking devices right now saying, what do you mean it's Operation Sea Lion? Well, we'll talk about Operation Sea Lion a little bit. Operation Sea Lion was Hitler's plan to invade Britain. And essentially it never worked. He, thought they never had the resources to even begin to pull it off. The army had said, look, the only chance we have of invading Britain is landing on a broad front. The Navy said, we can't secure a broad front. You have to go in narrow. We know from later, Churchill talked about this later, if the Germans had ever been able to establish a beachhead, they were going to use mustard gas. So that's what was waiting for them on the other side of the channel. The British had naval superiority. So they couldn't protect their landing craft. They couldn't, and again, the Air Force is doing things. The Luftwaffe was supposed to be unstoppable, but the Spitfires are actually proving a match for them. And one of the reasons they're able to be a match for them is that the British have worked out radar. So the British can coordinate their attack. The British can radio. They see these guys coming the second the Luftwaffe takes off. And it turns out that Hitler's vaunted dive bombers are kind of slow and easy targets for these Spitfires. And Hitler never really figured out how critical the radar infrastructure was to the defense of Britain. So they were never really able to knock it out. And again, instead of attacking the air defenses, he at one point was just like bombing London. Didn't want to, but there was a bombing in Berlin, and then they went into Blitz happened, right?
So when you hear all these homeless schizophrenics on the streets ranting about what they want to do in the future, Hitler's the one guy.
Yeah, exactly. He goes literally from homeless lunatic ranting to other bums in men's flop houses to a world power and a world leader, and
trying to invade Britain.
Trying to invade Britain. Now the biggest thing, it's funny, the people who could still talk sense to Hitler at this point were the economics guys. After the Night of Long Knives, the one guy that actually called Hitler to task was the head of the insurance trust. He said, how much blast these fucking people broke? I'm going to pay for that!
Yeah.
The other guys who could kind of, call Hitler in are the industrialists. And the industrialists try and explain to Hitler, buddy, if we take the barges off the fucking rivers and we try and use them to invade Britain, we're going to have nothing to ship internally with. Our whole internal logistics are going to break down. And even if they had the barges ready to go, they didn't have the Air Force and the air power to protect the concentration of troops. Because again, you got to get everybody together before you make a launch. And anytime they got large groups together of soldiers or equipment, the Spitfires came in from across the channel and bombed them and shot them up. And it was to where they were getting attrition from that. And they're bombing cities. It's all anyway. So yes, there was a plan. It was never serious. It was never attempted. It was based on fantasy weapons. It was Hitler was not. There was never a serious, there was a serious effort to break Britain and kind of from the air, push them to make peace, but there was a serious attempt to kind of disable its shipping so that they couldn't import enough food to feed the population. They have to make peace, but they really, there wasn't a serious attempt to actually reverse D-Day Britain. One thing Hitler did do is he tried to stir up the Irish. He gave speeches talking to directly to the Irish Taoiseach, saying, isn't it horrible what the Britons are doing to your people? And another group he liked to stick up for were the Arabs. He loved to talk about the horrible oppressed Arabs in the Middle East. Yeah. And how can you say that I am a conquering monster when you people are doing this to these poor people?
I think the Nazis and the Arabs have a couple more things in common than that.
Well, that's fair. Very fair point. And on that point, the government of Iraq actually sided with Hitler.
Yeah.
So that's a little later, but that happens. We did his successes in terms of foreign policy, and now we're going to do when his luck ran out. People often say Hitler's a genius. I wouldn't say Hitler's any more a genius than the guy who goes to the casino and plays blackjack and wins, and then takes his winnings and puts it all down and wins again, and then continues to win for a little while. The problem is sooner or later the bill comes due.
Yes, they call that the gambler's fallacy, thinking that if you keep doubling down, you're gonna eventually hit it big.
Yeah, it's if you like gambling, you probably don't know a lot about finite math.
No.
But much like Hitler, actually, Hitler's armies have flattened France. You had the miracle at Dunkirk. You got the British Expeditionary Force rescued, but they lost basically all of their heavy equipment. And I am at this point really fascinated by I'm fascinated by what Hitler's army can do versus what Hitler's army can't do. They can, this is World War I. They fought over this territory for literally years. Hitler, with his new techniques and his new technology, crashes through the Maginot Line, gets France to capitulate very, very quickly. But then they get to the English Channel, and they are stumped. They can't cross it. 70 kilometers of water at its narrowest, and this massive army has no way to get across.
Yeah, it's not the first time that the English Channel has been called the widest body of water in the world. Usually that means the difference between the English culture and French culture, or possibly Henry VIII and the Catholic Church. But it tends to stop a lot of people in their tracks.
Much like Hitler. Now, Hitler hadn't put a lot of thought into crossing the English Channel because his political calculus had said, okay, I'm going to knock France out. I'm going to take over the Low Countries, which is going to let me have air bases, very close to where I need to take on Britain. Why would they continue to fight? Why is Churchill gonna keep fighting? Poland's been destroyed. France has been destroyed. What's there to fight about? Like, they clearly they have to acknowledge my place on the continent. They're gonna, if they're reasonable, they're gonna do that. Well, Churchill was not reasonable. Hitler, for a fanatic, had met his match. And apparently the surrender was, according to Churchill's biography, the concept of making a peace with Nazi Germany was never even discussed. But Hitler's really, really furious. He can't wrap his head around why these darn British people won't make peace.
Yeah, well, in the popular zeitgeist, or whatever you want to call it, you think of World War II as almost being two stoic men sitting across a chessboard from each other, Hitler and Churchill. But the more I learn about those two men, the less they both seem like geniuses, and the more they seem like fanatics.
Yeah, one thing they could both do is they could both talk very, very, very well. And they both understood the zeitgeist of their respective nations fairly well. It's like, instead of two stoic chess players, you maybe got Vince McMahon in one corner and you got Alex Jones in the other. And millions and millions of people's lives are in the balance here. But Hitler, this next part of his plan doesn't go according to plan because of Churchill's stubbornness and the British people's stubbornness. So he says, okay, I'll tell you what, we're going to put a little pressure on Britain to get them to see reason. We're going to attack them with the Luftwaffe, and we're going to attack them with the Navy and try and get them to try and cut off their shipping. And at the same time, we're going to bomb industrial facilities. We're going to try and take out their war machine. And once I start doing that, they realize how helpless they are. They're going to surrender. That's how the Blitz started, and it didn't work. Largely because of radar. The British had perfected radar, so they could see Hitler's planes taking off on mainland Europe and coordinate their defenses. Hitler didn't realize how important radar was to their defenses. But anyway, this is all going on. This is all in Hitler's view, wasted resources. The British are finished, he thinks, and his attention starts turning back east. Which, remember, is what he wanted from the very beginning. He put in Mein Kampf. My breathing room is going to be in Eastern Europe. So he starts thinking about the war in the East that he really, really wants to have. And there's a lot of reasons for this. It comes down to ideology, and Stalin had shown weakness. When Stalin tried to take over Finland, and the Finnish had managed to repel him and cause all kinds of problems for him, that convinced Hitler, okay, the Russians are a military non-threat. So that was, we have only to kick in the door and the whole rotting edifice will come down, is what the man said. But before we get into Operation Barbarossa and the attack on Russia, we're going to talk about Hitler's third from the top guy. This is Rudolf Hess. If you are having a bad day out in internet land and you need to chuckle at someone else's expense, I want you to Google a picture of Rudolf Hess. He's a thoroughly ridiculous looking man, and he'll give you a good laugh. He was really into astrology. You know, this wasn't a brain trust Hitler had surrounded himself with. They were into a lot of wacky things, and they all took astrology very, very seriously. And Rudolph's astrologer told him, Rudolph, you're destined to make peace. So Rudolph figures, okay, you know what, there's really not much for me to do running the Nazi party right now, and now the war's on, all the accolades are going to the army. I know what I can do. I can take my plane, you know how to fly a plane, fly to Scotland, make contact with the British royals and get rid of this Churchill guy and make a separate peace. And Hitler's going to be so happy with me, and I'm going to save everybody's lives, and we're going to have a wonderful history. My astrologer will have been right.
I'm not sure if the British royal family has the authority to depose the prime minister.
They don't. Hitler had a lot of trouble understanding that not all countries worked like his country. He didn't really understand, like, okay, these people really are dependent on what the people think. This really is a parliament. It's not. He couldn't understand. He's like, no, this is one guy running the show, right? If I just get the royals to pull the plug on this Churchill guy, well, everything will be fine. So he flies across the English Channel. His navigation is pretty close to right. He ends up which Duke?
Oh, the Duke of Hamilton.
Yeah, he lands near the Duke of Hamilton's estate. He ends up in a farmhouse. Says to the local farmers, guys, can you take me to your lord? The Scottish peasants said, sure, here, have a cup of tea, and then they called the cops. And this is where, we talk about World War II touching a lot of lives. This is where it actually touched the lives of one of the podcasters.
Yeah. My great uncle, my dad's uncle, was actually on the other side of that phone call. He was a military policeman, and all of his reports were out on the front lines, so there's nothing to do on the base. The base is empty. He was cleaning toilets or making beds, whatever he was doing. And he gets a phone call that says, hey, Willie, you'll never guess who we got here. He gets in the car and goes over to the Duke of Hamilton's estate. Rudolf Hess extends his hand, says, do you know who I am? And my uncle says, I know exactly who you are, and slaps the handcuffs on him.
Now, Rudolf was sure that he came unarmed of his own volition. He's going to get full diplomatic honors here. No, he got handcuffs and thrown into the back of a paddy wagon.
Yes, he did. And as I understand it, at the Nuremberg trial, he was deemed at his breaking point, no longer fit to defend himself.
Yeah, he was continually complaining about the treatment he received from these mean MPs. So
a little bit about the treatment he got from these mean Scottish people, i.e. my family members. They called Churchill, and Churchill said, well, you have a Nazi war criminal, that's great, we're going to have to deal with him, but there's a war to be fought, so just please take your time getting down to London. So for the next 6 months, my great uncle Willie and Rudolf Hess were traveling around the English countryside together, stopping at hotels, seeing sights, whatever else you do.
Now, I am not a playwright or a creative type. If I were, I would write a play about your great uncle and Rudolf Hess driving through the English countryside together. Like, kids! Hey, kids! What? You want to throw garbage at Rudolf Hess? Yay!
Yeah, that's what Scottish people do. That's
pretty much right. This is a group of people who, if you leave your pine unattended, they piss in it.
Yeah, that's.
So
I've been warned about that. Yes.
And these are their friends. Imagine what they do to war criminals.
So there's one more story about that. One night, my great uncle hears knocking in the night. Help! Help! So he goes to the cell and says, hey, what's going on? Well, the bombs were being dropped, and he said it's a convention of war. While the bombs are being dropped, it's a war crime if you don't give shelter to a prisoner of war. And being Scottish, he said, well, they're your own fucking bombs, and left him there.
Yeah. So these are the things that get left out of history that really give you the flavor of the moment.
Yeah.
And just a little, we like to break out of the kind of the dry history text when we can and tell you what happened.
Well, it's one thing to read about stuff in the books. It's in the history books. It's another thing when your grandparents' generation lived it.
Yeah, indeed it is. Now Churchill had already said, guys, even if you conquer Britain, I'm just going to go to Canada and keep fighting from there. He wasn't giving up. He was going to keep fighting. And Hitler thinks about it. He says, you know what, this is, I've got them bottled up. Britain's beaten. Let's not worry about this anymore. I'm going to, and the only reason that Churchill won't make peace with me is he's really, really hoping that I'm going to mix it up with Russia. And if I can go and defeat Russia, then they'll lose all hope, and then they'll see reason and they'll make peace with me. So Hitler, has an excuse finally. He's got what he thinks he needs to go in and invade Russia. This is not the first person who's made this mistake. Napoleon, in one of our last podcasts, made a similar mistake trying to go into Russia. There was a Swedish king. There was, I think, one more German king that tried to do it. Lots of people have gone to Russia. Winter hits. Army is completely destroyed. But Hitler, he's got the goods this time. They're going to do it really, really quickly.
Maybe this time it'll be different. Should be on a lot of gravestones.
Exactly. Hitler's plan is, okay, look, we're going to send one army group to St. Petersburg, which at the time they're calling something else, and just completely destroy the city. We're going to send another group down to Stalingrad, which they're now calling something else, to blow that up and destroy that industrial area. And then they're going to be a third army that's going to go to Moscow, which thankfully they're still calling Moscow. And we're going to destroy the weapons production around Moscow. We're going to have grabbed the Black Earth Belt of Ukraine in the process of doing this. Winter's going to hit, and the winter's going to do all our work for us. We're going to have their food. We're going to have their factories. They're going to all starve to death. They predicted 20 million Russians were going to starve to death if they could pull this plan off. It's just, again, what Hitler can do and what Hitler can't do is amazing. And Hitler had an army that was perfectly designed to destroy France. But this wasn't France. This was Russia. And, France has things like roads, a reasonable population that's not going to fight to the death, all sorts of, and it's much smaller.
Yeah. A leader who has who sees the value in human life.
Yeah, who understands that, maybe there's, not everything's a zero-sum game, and, willingness to negotiate. There's a lot of things there. The tanks that Hitler had very narrow treads. This is great if you want to go quick on a road. If you're trying to get through mud, your tank is now going to sink. And keep in mind, this whole thing was only supposed to take a season. They were going to go in the spring. They were going to grab what they needed to grab. They were going to leave the Russians to starve. They were going to be undisputed masters of Europe after this winter. Might have gone that way, except for Mussolini. Mussolini had his own plans. Mussolini was he's like, okay, shit, I am clearly the junior partner. I'm so sick of being the fucking Robin of fascism here. Hitler's Batman. I'm gonna get him back. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna invade Greece, and I'm gonna grab territory and not tell Hitler it's gonna be my thing. I'm gonna bring the focus back here and get a little pride for Italy. And that, again, might have been a good idea strategically, except he didn't have the army that could do it. So he attacked Greece. Greece defended itself, and then counterattacked and proceeded to start grabbing up Italian territory. Mussolini is forced to appeal to Hitler, hat in hand, for some help. Hitler says, okay, diverts some of his forces that are earmarked for Operation Barbarossa, rolls them into Greece. You get the shot of the swastika raised over the Acropolis at this point, kicks out the British allies, and conquers all the way down. But it costs him 6 weeks. Costs him 6 critical weeks to do that. And it turns out winter was going to come early that year, and they hadn't figured on one more thing, is that in Russia there are 5 seasons. There is summer, winter, fall, spring, and mud. They have a season of mud that comes on the tail end of winter and before winter, and the roads all become completely impassable. So Hitler initially does quite well. He completely has surprised Stalin, who, remember, they were allies, they had an non-aggression pact. It didn't really make any sense from Stalin's perspective that Germany would attack because they're getting all their war materials shipped in from Russia. So it doesn't make any sense from Uncle Stalin's perspective. But again, this was more about ideology than it was about strategy. Now, another thing about the right tool for the right job. None of this equipment, none of these panzers, machine guns, anything was designed to work in a Russian winter. When the winter finally hit and they had not captured their objectives, the only way to get a tank to start was to start a fire under the chassis, get it warm enough that way that it would, the ignition would work and get it started. They didn't have ropes to pull things out of the mud. They didn't have tractors. They didn't have horses. And best of all, they didn't have any winter gear. You see, Hitler was a year-round shorts guy. Hitler would go around the Austrian countryside in his lederhosen in winter and think, oh, this is just about having a good constitution. How bad can winter really get? Well, there's a little bit of a difference between a 0-degree winter in northern Austria and a negative 40-degree winter on the Russian steppes. So when his troops start coming back with their eyelids frozen off from the cold, then he's okay. Then he starts to maybe understand that, I didn't supply these guys, or someone didn't supply these guys correctly. It obviously wasn't Hitler. He could never take responsibility for anything. Now Hitler does very, very well early in the war. He gets very, very deep into Russia, and this leaves him with very long supply lines that he can't maintain on these shitty roads. It also puts him out of the range of his Luftwaffe. His Air Force can't protect him now. And all of a sudden, Uncle Stalin's got things like bullets, gasoline, war materials that he needs to fight this war. And he can suddenly arm all these gopniks, and they're starting to counterattack. This is all coming in through the American Lend-Lease Agreement. But it's okay. Hitler's got an idea. Cue Japan, other side of the world. He says if we can just get our ally Japan, who doesn't like the Russians anyway, to attack the Russians on their extreme east coast, then we'll have a two-front war against Russia. It'll divert a lot of their resources, and we'll start to get our objectives accomplished here.
Sure. Yeah, just to make one note, we think of World War II through the lens which we've seen countless movies and countless history textbooks and everything. We think of it as being one just all-encompassing global conflict. But Germany and Japan really didn't have an alliance in any sort of traditional sense of the word. The German generals never ever sat down with any Japanese generals. And the way you can see this is that the way that the Americans were shipping bullets to Russia was through Vladivostok. And to get a ship to Vladivostok, if you look at a map, you've got to sail straight through Japanese waters. If the Germans and the Japan had any sort of conventional military alliance, that just wouldn't have happened.
Well, and Hitler actually brought that up to his Japanese allies, and the Japanese said, "Well, look, we've got a non-aggression pact with the Soviets. We don't want to cause any problems here." So the Japanese again called Hitler in, and Hitler says, "We need you to go to war with Russia." And Japan said, "Okay, that would require profound reflection, Mr. Hitler, if we're going to do that. And we'd like some assurances first. Will you sign a treaty with us? You, Italy, get over here too. Mussolini, you're part of this. If we go to war, you two go to war too. Deal?" And he thinks we're talking about Russia. Okay, sure. Yeah, absolutely. You go to war, we'll go to war, no problem. Japan then attacks Pearl Harbor and goes to Germany and Italy and says, "Hey guys, yeah, by the way, this treaty, you got to go to war with America now." Hitler doesn't really understand the threat that America poses. Hitler's never been to America. Hitler really doesn't understand it. His American advisor is a guy who took a trip to New York. And he's after a sniff around New York. He says, goes back to the Führer and says, my Führer, this is a country that is half Judaized and half negrified. There's no way they're going to get an army up like they did in World War I. It's going to, they're on their knees. They have their racial problems. It's going to be way too hard for them to have an army, and they're isolationists. Hitler at this point, on a little side note, he dumped a lot of money to this point trying to keep America neutral. He gathered up some isolationist senators and congressmen and started funneling money to them, and they were called the America First Committee.
Yeah. Oh, Charles Lindbergh was the head of that committee.
So the more things change, you get lots of meddling in politics. But anyway, so that puts now America in the war. And as big as their racial problems were, they're still a continental superpower. And they saw what happened in Pearl Harbor, and they said, okay, boys, I guess we're going to war on 3 continents. And they proceeded to unify and mobilize in a terrifying way.
And just another thing, again, we think of World War II again as being something all-encompassing, but Japan is still never at war with Russia at any point here. So it's probably more accurate to think of the Pacific theater and the European theater as 2 separate wars as opposed to 2 aspects of one gigantic war. They really don't have very much to do with each other.
Yeah, they ended at different times, all different combatants, everything. So Hitler is now at war with not only Russia and Britain, but with America. And the Americans decide, look, we're gonna crush Nazi Germany first. Germany first policy. That's where our resources are going to go, and they do. But Uncle Stalin is not happy. Uncle Stalin says, "Look, I'm bleeding myself white, or the Gopniks are bleeding themselves white, fighting Russia here. I know you're giving me bullets and equipment, but really what I need is a second front on the continent." And Churchill takes Stalin aside and he goes, "Stalin, listen. What you're asking us to do is like attacking the teeth of the crocodile. We want to go down and get into the Mediterranean and get under the soft belly of the crocodile and attack there. And that's where we'll open up our second front for you." And Stalin wasn't thrilled, but he let them go. So the Americans land in Africa. Now Rommel, I got to touch on Rommel at this point. Rommel had done amazing things in North Africa. The most amazing thing he did is he was able to get victories with Italian troops. This blew everybody's
The Italians can't get victories with Italian troops.
Exactly. And somehow Rommel's able to get, he's got, I think, eight Italian divisions, and he can actually get them to fight and be effective against Montgomery.
Yeah, like I said, the Germans really do have an alliance with Italy. It's not like they have with Japan.
No, they're tied at the hip. I use the Batman and Robin analogy because that's very apt. They're buddies. They're partners in this. They send Patton to North Africa. The Americans land in North Africa. Rommel was never really able to exploit his advantage for 2 reasons. The first is Hitler didn't bother to take out Malta. So there's a little island in the eastern Mediterranean that they used as a staging base for attacking convoys that were going from Italy to supply Rome. So that was one thing. They were never able to bottle up Malta, and that was the key to harassing, limiting Rommel's supplies and that.
Well, Malta's been important since the age of the Templars. It's not something new here.
Well, it's how myopic Hitler is. Hitler is at this point so focused on Russia and the Eastern Front that he's, maybe Rommel is doing well in Africa. Who cares? That's not what I want. I want to beat the Russians. Had Rommel been reinforced properly, he could have potentially gotten through Cairo to the Arabian oil fields and then cut off the Brits' supply of oil. And that would have been critical, and they also would have captured the Suez. But he's not resupplied. And General Patton lands in West Africa. And again, initially, Rommel has better equipment, he's got better tanks, he's got better troops, but Patton's got a lot more. And he proceeds to, against Hitler's orders, eventually retreats and saves his whatever he can of his forces and gets back to Italy. The Italians at this point realize, shit, we've lost North Africa. We're next, aren't we, guys? And the Italians, it's not like a German situation. The Germans really did kind of swallow Nazism, hook, line, and sinker. The Italians are a little bit more sophisticated in certain ways. And they never really embraced fascism. It was kind of a passing fad. He's got the trains running on time, whatever. But and again, Mussolini had failed to destroy all the other institutions that could have potentially given him some trouble. One of those institutions is the church. The other one is the Italian monarchy. So the monarch of Italy calls Mussolini and he says, "Mussolini, this is terrible. This is going awfully. The soldiers don't want to fight anymore. You're the most hated man in Italy. You're deposed. Get out of here. You're going to jail." And Mussolini just kind of meekly accepts it. Okay, all right, I get it. My time's up. My king's telling me. It's all over. And Hitler sees this and is not going to let his junior partner go out this way. So he sends his special forces in, SS special forces, to use paragliders to get in and land on the top of the jail, kidnap Mussolini, get him to a safe spot in northern Italy, and then take over the industrial regions of northern Italy and hold the line. The Italians were more or less going to surrender. They didn't want to fight on their territory. With Patton rolling up the boot, it was just okay. Time to go. We're switching sides. That's it. There's a funny Führer conference. Some of the Führer conference, this is Hitler's daily meetings with his staff, survived, and he says things like, "Oh, I don't care if they're hiding Mussolini in the Vatican. You think the Vatican embarrasses me? I'll roll tanks right into the Vatican and get the line." So it's anyway. This brings me to mention, something about Hitler. And as I'm reading the reports of Hitler's underlings, particularly at this part in the war, I really can understand what they're going through, because I also have worked for megalomaniacal drug addicts who won't see a reason and don't understand that there's hard limits that are part of reality. I mean, you can't just be King Canute and say the tide needs to stop. For anyone who's ever worked for a drug addict, I don't know if anyone out there has bounced or worked at a bar. They're usually run by very ill people, and they're nuts. And I had a boss named Moise, who was a Moroccan Jew. I think Moise was less racist was more racist than Hitler. I think Hitler actually was probably more open-minded than Moise when it came to various ethnicities. But Moise couldn't understand. I tried to explain to him, Moise, we can't do I guess we're going to call it a hard urban jam for anyone who understands the lingo. I can't do that with the number of bouncers that you're providing here. I need more security, or this is going to be a nightmare. Well, if you can't do the job, and this is what Hitler's doing. Anyone who he's putting out these insane orders, the more his generals lose, or if they lose or if they retreat, he cashiers them. So all of his talented generals, anyone with any independent thinking, is getting pulled off the front lines and decommissioned, or worse, put in camps. And he's micromanaging her. So it's again, you got a boss. He's put you in an impossible situation, and now he's going to micromanage you. He's gonna tell you exactly how, because that's apparently the problem, is he's not micromanaging you enough. This is where Hitler's at. So this brings us now to the Normandy landings. Stalin's finally getting his second front. The Allies land. And remember, there have been raids, there have been Dieppe, there have been some feints before this. So Hitler is not really sure that this is going to be the main invasion. He's thinking maybe this is a feint, and he goes to bed. They say, look, we got to roll the tanks really, really quickly. 2 Panzer divisions ready to go. We got to roll these tanks on this beachhead. We might be able to wrap it up if we do it quickly. And Hitler says, no, I don't want to commit forces until we know for sure that this is going to be their main thrust. Goes to bed. Proceeds to sleep until 3 p.m. the next day. He's passed out. He's got a physician that's giving him probably harsh stimulants. We don't really know what Hitler was on, but during these Führer conferences, he's taking drugs. He's sucking on pills. It's most likely he's on speed or other harsh stimulants to keep him up to micromanage everybody. Now Hitler's no retreat order also, was applied to the Western Front as much as it applied to the Eastern Front. And he wouldn't allow the troops to pull back out of the range of the British and American naval guns to fight a more even battle further away from the shore. He insisted that his defensive forces fight within range of the British naval guns. So that contributed to the loss too. Hitler again won't listen, and just throws tantrums. And the more they lose, the more tantrums he throws. We're going to return now to the east for a little bit, to the city of Stalingrad. Now again, Hitler did not have to invade this city. Strategically, all he had to do was control the Volga, which is the river that runs through Stalingrad. If he could stop traffic on that river, he can cut off the flow of oil to Moscow, which is the industrial area that's making all the weapons that aren't being made in America. And he can cut off their oil and he can cause some problems there. But he doesn't. He wants to capture the city that Stalin is named after him. So he sends his troops into the city. Now, if you're a game designer and you need to design a PvP environment and need some inspiration, look at Stalingrad. If you wanted to make a city that would be hard to invade and or hold, you design something like Stalingrad. It's a very long, thin city hugging a very wide river.
It would be a level where a lot of people get killed, right?
Yeah, you'd need a lot of, hopefully you got infinite lives in this game, or the cheat code. But so the Germans went in, and essentially what happened is the same thing you're seeing in Bakhmut or Avdiivka, some of these really fought over cities in Ukraine right now. The same kind of thing. You have this brutal urban combat. It doesn't matter in urban combat if your troops are better equipped. It doesn't matter if they're more, if they have smarter, have better morale, better leadership. Does not matter. You're fighting over rubble, and it's such brutal fighting that you're gonna lose troops. They called it the Rat War, the Rattenkrieg, because they were fighting in dumpsters and through garbage and rubble. Complete nightmare. And Hitler just keeps dumping troops into this. He dumps 200,000 troops, the full Sixth Army, into this city. And they capture it, and then the Soviets counterattack and surround the city. Now, they could have broken out at one point, but Hitler says, no, stand your ground. And they do. They stand their ground and they fight. Now, they're surrounded. They can't get the bullets they need. They can't get the food they need. They can't get anything they need to supply a modern army, but they're still told to fight. You can't surrender. It was Hitler's orders, that's how Hitler lost in one silly decision, managed to lose the 200,000 some odd soldiers. Hitler tried to conscript his way out of this mess. He says, okay, look, we'll go into Romania, we'll go into what was the Czech Republic, or whatever, the Czechoslovakia. We'll go into all these areas, we'll dig up as many soldiers as we can, Italy, and these guys will kind of guard our flanks and our supply lines, and we'll do the fighting, and then it'll free up more Germans to destroy communism. It turns out, though, these guys, these conscripted soldiers, weren't really down to die in Russia. And they would often run away when attacked, and the Russians figured this out and started concentrating their attacks on these formations. It allowed them to completely disrupt German supply lines. Remember, once those troops are cut off, they're not allowed to retreat. So if you can disrupt the supply line, you can just do nasty things. We're going to take a moment to talk about the T-34 tank. This is something that, again, you talk about the mythos of a war. This is something that in the Russian world really has a lot of mythology. It's an unstoppable tank. It had armor thick enough to withstand shelling from Panzer. Great. The other thing it had was a really big, wide tread, so it could drive through the mud. But the real genius of that tank is they were able to crank out 50,000 of them in relatively short order, whereas Hitler was only able to make about 17,000 Panthers. That was in the whole war. So that'll give you an idea of what quantity has a quality all its own, as they sometimes hear people talk about. Now, you talk about Germany's expensive toys getting destroyed. We've got to talk about the Bismarck. Bismarck is Germany's flagship. And it tied up with the British flagship, the Hood, and destroyed the Hood and killed all but 3 of the sailors on that ship. After that, a tiny little fighter tiny little fighter plane flew in and dropped a torpedo. And the torpedo hit the rudder of the Bismarck, and then it couldn't steer. And because it couldn't steer and maneuver, they were able to surround it and destroy it. And that story of that tiny little fighter coming in and damaging and allowing this mighty battleship to get laid low inspired George Lucas when he made the X-Wing fighter destroy the Death Star. So if you talk about the art imitating life, this is where he got that idea. Now from fantasy boys back to very, very harsh reality. You've got Italy half conquered by the Allies. You've got a bloody, nasty war in the east with the Soviets pushing closer and closer to German territory, actual German territory. And in the west, you've got the Allies pushing through towards the fatherland. This triggers some of Hitler's generals to say, okay, look, we've got to try to kill this guy. And like typical Germans, they over-engineer the attempt. They got to blow him up. Underling is privy to this. He goes, guys, I've got a machine gun encampment. This is wartime. There's machine guns everywhere. When Hitler's car pulls up for his Fuhrer conference, I will riddle the car with bullets. Kill everyone in there, all of his SS bodyguards, and then they'll be done. They said, no, we got to blow him up. But wait, they can't blow him up because German bombs of this era have fuses, and the fuse lets off a hiss, and the hiss gives away the bomb. So they've got to go to the British Secret Service, and they've got to get a bomb that works with acid eating away at a rubber band until it gives, and then that hits the striker. So that's at least quiet. But it takes 10 minutes for the bomb to go off. You can't set the timer for any less than 10 minutes. So they've got to be sure Hitler's going to be 10 minutes for something. And Hitler keeps changing his schedules. Hitler, he says, I'll be here for 15 minutes. He leaves after 5. There's some Saddam Hussein did too, which is one way. If you guys are ever dictator and you don't want to die, keep changing your schedule. Be very random. That's something that works. So finally they go, look, he comes to his Fuhrer conference. This is like his daily staff meeting on the war. We know he's coming there. Let's just blow him up there. I'll put the bomb in my briefcase. It'll work better because it's in a bunker, so everything will be amplified. And it'll kill Hitler, and we'll say it was an enemy bomb, and we'll negotiate a peace before everybody's dead and the fatherland's destroyed. And that's what would have happened, except for German craftsmanship. Like they say, sometime Chris Rock had a great joke. The tiger that bit Siegfried, it didn't go crazy, it went tiger. Mm-hmm. That tiger went tiger. And this is the Germans going Germans. You're trying to kill them, they over-engineer it, and then German craftsmanship, this oak table is so finely made with such thick supports that the bomb goes off on the other side of one of these supports from Hitler, and it saves Hitler's life. Hitler's deaf, Hitler's burned, but Hitler now knows somebody important's trying to kill him, and he can sick his SS on these guys.
Good thing Hitler wasn't Swedish.
If that had been an IKEA table, we'd have a very different history. But we're in Germany, so yeah, we're getting good tables here that can stop bombs. The guy who planted the bomb says, "Don't worry, I'm going to do the honorable thing. I'm going to kill myself before Hitler can torture me into revealing my fellow conspirators." And he drives out to a World War I battlefield that he fought in, and he tries to kill himself. But all he does is blow his eyes out. And he's found alive by the Germans, and the SS tortures him into giving up more people. One of the guys that he rats out tries to kill himself too. He's another one of these old army guys. So they're like, look, we caught you trying to kill Hitler. And the guy goes, look, let me write a letter to my wife, and then I'll blow my brains out. So they're Germans, sure, right? Here's some paper, here's a pen. Letter to your wife, done. This guy tries to shoot himself, scratches his head. Bullet doesn't go the right way. Tries to shoot himself again. He's at least unconscious this time, but he's not dead. And
so sometimes the Germans don't do things efficiently.
They can't kill themselves. The conspirators who are trying to kill Hitler cannot commit suicide successfully. The only one who really kills himself successfully is Rommel, and they send him poison. Rommel is super popular. Rommel is beloved by the German people at this point. Hitler figures, I can't kill him, he's too popular. What I'll do is I'll go to Rommel, I'll say, look, I know you tried to kill me, but if you drink this poison, I'll leave your family alone. Everybody else's families went to the concentration camps. Who was involved in this plot. Rommel's family was left unmolested. They said Rommel died of his war injuries, because these guys were all getting strafed and shot and blown up by the Allies at this point. They gave him a state funeral, but everybody else, they had a different plan for him. Now, they dressed them up in very shabby clothes with no belts and nothing to hold their trousers up. And they gave him a show trial. And they very, very quickly declared them, traitors, and then they all had to be killed. And Hitler wanted them hung. Now, the problem is, in Berlin, the traditional mode of execution is the headsman's axe. So they would behead them with an axe. Not good enough for Hitler, but he won't be beaten. He's German, he's crafty. He sends his boys down to the local butcher shop. They get meat hooks and cranes. They didn't get the cranes from the butcher shop. They tie piano wire around these meat hooks. They put it around the guy's necks, and they slowly lift them up into the air and strangle them to death by these wires. Now they record this execution, and then they show it to the officer corps to let everybody know, guys, by the way, if you step out of line, this is what we're going to do to you. And yeah, that's and then Hitler made the decision to say, okay, running low on troops, all these Hitler Youth kids and all these old men in the replacement army, you guys are soldiers now to the front lines. And all of the children and old men were then used to prolong the defense of the fatherland and keep Hitler in power a little bit longer. Now, this brings us to Hitler's last days. We can't really talk about Hitler's last days without talking about Mussolini's last days. Mussolini had tried to escape when northern Italy fell. He tried to escape into Switzerland dressed up as a crippled soldier with an eye patch. And they found him, and they killed him, and hung his body up by its heels with his wife from lampposts, and then cut the bodies down and let them lay in the gutter. And the Italians came, were spitting on them and all this, reviling them. And Hitler wasn't going to let that happen to his body. Hitler was particularly worried about being on exhibit in Madison Square Garden. He was really worried that international Jewry was going to turn him into an exhibit.
It's awfully specific, Madison Square Garden.
He was on drugs. He was on a lot of drugs, and this is what he was worried about. I guess his American advisor had only ever been to New York,
Yeah,
so maybe
is
that.
he worried he's going to be in P.T. Barnum's sideshow,
Yeah,
next to the bearded lady?
He doesn't want to be. He wants to make sure he gets top billing, even in the freak show post-war. I guess he'd seen King Kong. Maybe that's all I can think of. So now, and again, it's freaking cuckoo land in the Fuhrer bunker. The enemies are at the gate. The communists are surrounding Berlin. Everything's falling, and Hitler's worried about who's going to succeed him. And all of his underlings are worried about who's going to succeed him. It's to the point where people are sending Hitler passive-aggressive telegrams being like, Mein Führer, by the way, if you don't respond to this, I'm in charge, right? And Hitler's determined to hold power to the very, very end. But first, he's got some personal business to attend. He's going to marry his mistress. And he had Eva came to Berlin. They got married. They had a party. Then they went to bed. And Hitler came out later and yelled at the guests to keep it down. He was trying to get some sleep. I don't know what he was killing himself the next day. Anyway, so they have a party. And in the Fuhrer bunker, well, all the kids and old men are dying to keep the communists out. And Hitler says after the party, okay, I'm going to shoot myself, guys. I don't want my body found. You need to take me outside after this and burn my body, And that's what they did. Hitler shot himself in the mouth, and they took his body out and they burned it. And that's why they never found Hitler's body. How do we know that's what happened? How do we know he didn't escape to Argentina? Well, everyone who they captured who was in the Fuhrer bunker, they interrogated them separately, and this is the story they all told. So we have independent witnesses saying this is what happened. And the reason they never found his body is because between the fire and the Russian shelling, there was nothing left. It was indistinguishable from the other, mutilated, blown up bodies that were populating Berlin at that point. And that's it's interesting. It was it brings us back to Wotan. The German ring opera.
Wotan, you mean?
Yeah, the German ring opera.
Yeah.
And what happens at the end? The enemy's at the gates. He's going to bring Valhalla down. Hitler, right before his death.
Ragnarok.
Exactly. And before his death, he orders anything that could possibly be useful in the post-war order to be destroyed. He wants every bridge blown up. He wants all the storage facilities destroyed. He wants the power and the electricity completely blown up. Thankfully, this isn't carried out, but that's what Hitler wanted. He wanted everybody to die with him. And then at this point, anyone left in the Nazi party, they go down to the canteen. They drink all of the booze that's there. They load up whatever trucks and vehicles they can with the loot that they're carrying out. They try and escape Berlin. Some do, some don't. Some of them make it to Argentina. Some of them do not make it to Argentina. Some of them are blown up trying to flee Berlin. And that's what happened. Eventually, reality asserted itself, and Hitler couldn't deal with it, and that was the end of Adolf Hitler. I want to talk about a couple of things. First, I want to talk about Hitler's personal life. I think everybody, has kind of been lost in his story. We don't know a ton about Hitler's personal life. He had a sister. He had a half brother. The half brother would never talk about him. If anyone tried to get the half brother to open up about Adolf, he would just shut right down. Go about his business. Apparently very frustrating to deal with. Hitler, again, he'd been a spoiled brat. There's no evidence that he was gay, but he wrote terrible love poetry. He would get these kind of like courtly interests in women as a young man and write these awful poems about like, you know, my lady is on a white horse in a green meadow, like just shit like, you know, melodramatic nonsense.
He's as good of a poet as he was a painter.
Exactly. He's a terrible, terrible fucking artist. The one love affair that we know he had was with his niece. Again, he was from kind of a backwater in Germany, and marrying your niece wasn't that far out of the realm of social norms that it you know, kicked up a stir. So he wanted to marry his niece. We, again, don't really know what happened. We've got a couple of letters that were exchanged between the two of them. Hitler wanted to be dominated by his partner, by his young niece. Hitler was a bottom, we know that much. And his niece was really freaked out by this, as opposed to, you know, being freaked out that this was her uncle. And wanted to go and be an opera singer in Vienna, and Hitler wouldn't let her go, and she ended up killing herself. We know that she slept with Hitler's gay bodyguard at one point. A bit of a weird flex. We're not sure why the gay bar bouncing amateur wrestler bodyguard of Hitler and the niece hooked up. It's just the degeneracy of the times, I guess. Everybody's just...
Degeneracy of the country as well.
Degeneracy, yeah. Anyone who's seen Germany. The more tightly wound a group of people, the more degenerate they seem to be. The Germans and the Japanese is two classic examples of very well-ordered people that produce very disturbing pornography. Hitler, again, he's a vegetarian. He was a non-drinker, but he had a sweet tooth. He loved Viennese pastries, and he ate quite a lot of them. That was some of his favorite food. And he was a dog guy. A lot of times dictators like horses and dogs. Hitler was no exception. He loved his Alsatian named Blondie. And he had a few other dogs. And if you ever Google a picture of Hitler with his dogs, you see a side of Hitler you don't really see often represented. He's just very happy. He's, you know, usually in his lederhosen and just thrilled to be around these obedient creatures. So that's kind of what we know about Hitler's personal life. It's a big thing. He burned his diary, so we lost a lot of it, and that's been lost to history. So a lot of this we have to kind of infer. Now, another thing I didn't talk about too much, or I glanced over, was the final solution. I'm sorry for anyone who wants a different answer, but it did happen. There were definitely death camps. There were definitely exterminations.
That's not what I read on 4chan.
It's just what can you do with, But essentially, it started slowly. There were always camps. The second Hitler took power, there were camps to put people out of the way, but these weren't extermination camps. These were concentration camps. When he invaded Russia, when he finally did his big push into the east, the army kind of still had a little bit of their senses, and they said, "Look, Mein Führer, these orders that you're giving us to kill all the Jews and communists and any intellectuals." We can't. We're the German army. We can't carry this out. This is against our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or whatever the equivalent they fucking have. And Hitler said, "No problem. You just conquer the territory. I'll send in my SS/SA goons, depending on what is SS at this point, and they're going to do all the dirty work for us. And they'll be civil administration, so it won't be the fault of the army." And the army said, "Oh, great, that works for us." So he's sending his thugs. These are his, again, not the regular army. This is kind of Hitler's private anti-Semitic stormtrooper brigade. And they, even for these guys, it's really hard to do the work. It wasn't gas at the beginning. Gas is something that kind of became later. The first thing they do is they'd round up the troublemakers. They take them usually to an anti-tank ditch, line them up and shoot them. But this was really...
I'm sure the word troublemaker is used very, very loosely there.
It was. Anyone who looks at them sideways, I think, is a direct quote from one of these guys. But they round them up. They took them to... And again, this was hateful work for even these SS goons. And they'd complain about the headaches and problems and how difficult it was just to deal with the strain of carting off hysterical women and children and and exterminated. Like, it was still the psychological toll of the soldiers was enough that they had to come up with a better way to do it. And being Germans, they very, very practically thought, okay, look, we've got vans. The vans already produce poison gas. Let's just change. Let's change the exhaust so that the exhaust port goes into the back of the van, and done. We can kill
Bim, bam, boom.
20, 30 people at a time, no problem. Nobody's got to shoot children in the face. It's fine. This will make it a lot easier. But this is still a big thing on the troops, or on the Einsatzgruppen, and because if you don't press on the accelerator, and if the gas isn't set, like the valve, it was controlled by levers. If the levers weren't set just right, instead of passing out, people suffocated. And so they're screaming, yelling, shitting, bleeding. And then the Einsatzgruppe had to go in, pull them apart, and then take the bodies to the ditch and throw it in the anti-tank ditch. And they were getting exposed to carbon monoxide when they were doing this, and getting headaches and health issues after a day of this. So again, they thought, what do we need? We got to kill all these people. Let's open this up to industry. So they started taking bets on who can design the best death camps. How are we going to get rid of the bot? All these. And again, there's these reports from respectable companies saying, okay, this is how we're going to build it. This is the advantage of building it in Auschwitz or Dachau.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that. Being a fascist or being a neo-Nazi is completely verboten in society. We've done everything we can to scrub out every trace of that. But all of these corporate sponsors, ThyssenKrupp, Volkswagen, Hugo Boss, all of these companies, they got off with a slap on the wrist. The corporate sponsors survived just fine.
Henry Ford,
IBM, the list goes on.
But it's many of these companies still exist and still are good. But anyway, so I think it was IG Farben that supplied the Zyklon B gas, that's how they did. So they started establishing concentration camps, they started building purpose-built extermination camps and saying they're concentration camps essentially. Some of the weirder stories, you guys have probably heard about lampshades getting made out of Jewish skin. It did happen. It happened in one camp. It wasn't standard operating procedure. You had this really bizarre couple that's running this camp. There's a general of some kind and his wife. And the wife was fascinated by tattoos. So if you were an inmate and you had tattoos, they would separate you, knock you over the head so your skin didn't get damaged, separate the skin, and then the skin was later processed into, among other things, lampshades. Because you get the tattoo, you've got a little light up thing. I think that the lampshade had Hansel and Gretel. I think it was a tattoo that they put on a type specimen. But so that happened, and then later they got into trouble, not for the lampshade skin, but because they'd lied about where their kids came from. The lady in her 50s had told everybody, I had 3 kids in my 50s. And it turns out, no, she'd kidnapped them. So that was, that's what.
So it's like the speaking of Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah,
she's
exactly. Yeah,
the
she's
real life witch from Hansel and Gretel.
The wicked witch, exactly. Now it's interesting too. You hear a lot about like the sexual sadism of the SS. This is one thing the Nazis took seriously. Now it's not because they cared if Jewish people were getting raped. It's because the bestiality was against the law, and they considered sex with Jewish women to be bestiality, and punished it accordingly. So that was, it happened. I'm sure there were lots of issues or lots of problems in this, in with that. But that was officially the Nazi party line is bestiality if you sleep with a Jewish girl. So that's how you got punished. There's also one last thing I'll talk about is the medical experiments that happened under the Third Reich. Some of this stuff's still used today. One of the things they did is they wanted to see how long they could freeze someone for and still bring them back to life. So they did experiments where they'd throw a guy in a freezer or expose him outside, and then time how long they'd kept him outside, then see how to warm them up, when they came back in. And then they decided that wasn't good enough because it was dry freezing. What if the guy falls in the ocean? We got to know how this works with water. So they did it with cold water. And then later they decided, oh wait, we didn't submerge the guy's head. So we got to do these experiments again with the guy's head. And then that still wasn't enough. One of the Nazi higher-ups said, no, wait a minute. What if you use animal heat instead of warm baths to warm these guys up? And they got some Slavic prostitutes and they tried to see how long it would take Slavic prostitutes to warm up the half-frozen, usually Russian test subject.
Now, in the modern age of the Institutional Review Board, I gotta say this is terrible ethics, but really a well-designed experiment that you just don't see in much these days anymore.
They had control groups. It's good science.
Yeah.
Say what you will about the morality of it. They wanted to see how long people could live on salt water. So they took gypsies and fed them only salt water to see how, I don't know, they were curious about that. There's also, we hear a little bit about Alsace-Lorraine when we're talking about it. This was the towns that Germany and France were so bitterly trying to capture in World War I.
Oh, the Franco-Prussian War as well.
The Franco-Prussian War as well. And essentially, this is where the anatomy school was. And they were really into the new racial science. So they wanted to get lots of specimens of people to see, what the difference was in anatomy between the various races. So they got Jewish skeletons, which they didn't have a lot of, and they got Slavic skeleton. They did a bunch of measurements, and they built the collection. So that was.
There was a time that you would be a zoologist. Now you're somebody who studies reptiles, or somebody who studies birds, or somebody who studies insects. Over time these things become more and more specialized. I guess somebody who studies the human anatomy is general. I guess they were trying to specialize that as well.
And from that degeneracy to degenerate art. A lot of the Nazis were failed artists, or very interested in artistic circles and culture, and they had a lot of their crappy plays that no one would touch till they came to power. They would put those out and force poor actors to stage their awful plays. People more or less just stopped going to the theater. They stopped reading the newspaper because it was all the same. Readership declined, I think, by half throughout the Third Reich. The one art that was more or less left alone was music. It was, more or less non-political, and that was more. So music was preserved. The stage was kind of
Nazi theme music wasn't until the '80s in Screwdriver.
Exactly. So anyway, Hitler, one of the things he did to try and move society culturally forward is he came up with an exhibit of good German art, and then somewhere else in town was a exhibit of degenerate art. And the degenerate art, again, you're not talking about like big mouth and like bum fights, and not that kind. That's what I was expecting. It was all the Impressionists, the Cubists, all the guys that drew non-high realism. That's who ended up in the degenerate art exhibit. And people were lined up to see the degenerate art, and he couldn't get, the Nazis couldn't get anyone to come see the normal art that they were exhibiting. That brings us back to how the hell did Germany get denazified? Now, there's a lot of talk about what the Allies did and the psychology and the education. Really, I think it comes down to the same way that the Mexico got de-Aztecified, and that is, they went in and they smashed the altar. Your God can't protect you anymore. There is a new God in town. You're done. In World War I, they didn't smash the altar. They didn't defeat them on the battlefield. In World War II, they smashed the shit out of that altar.
Yeah.
And
questionable ethics, but war is hell, right?
Yeah. And they smashed it, and the Germans, being go along to get along kind of people, said, "Okay, now we are social democrats. Okay, that's what we're doing." And that's what they did, except in the East.
Well, I was talking to a guy who he was an American guy. He was an American Army brat who went to school on some army base in East Germany. And he said after the fall of the Berlin Wall, everybody was listening to their grandparents talk about how, things were so much better before the communists took over. Well, who was there before the communists took over?
Yeah, I wish I could say my grandpa was any different, but Dido, my mom's side of the family is Ukrainian and Russian. Dido, you talk about this war touching a lot of lives, right? This is, what happened to my grandfather's story. He was not a big fan of the communists. He knew how to run a farm, his family farm, and that made him a class traitor. So they kicked him off the farm, and then he was conscripted into the Soviet army. The Soviets told him, the Germans are going to castrate you, cut out your tongue, and take you as a slave to Germany. And Tito said, wait, the communists have been full of shit for as long as there have been communists. I'm going to just take my chances with the Germans. And he was taken as a slave, but they didn't castrate him or cut his tongue out.
1 out of 3 is bad.
Yeah, exactly. And to the day he died, he had not a bad thing to say about the Germans. I tried to get him to say bad things about the Germans. I'd be like, but Tito, they didn't feed you. And he'd be like, they didn't have any food. How are they supposed to feed me? He felt the Germans really knew how to party. He loved drinking their beer and partying with them. He felt a good culture in that sense. And the way that he was able to survive the war is he was carpenter. He could woodwork a little bit, and they needed anybody who could woodwork to rebuild what the Allies were bombing. So the air raids would come, the sirens would go off, all the Germans would go down into the bomb shelter, and Tito would then go and burglarize the German houses that were left unguarded to steal food. And that's how they survived. That's likely how he survived the war. He weighed 84 pounds at the end of it, but that's it. Contrast that with his attitude towards the communists. He told me, Jay, listen, when the communists showed up, they came into my village and they said, does anyone have any problems? You're all now communists now. Don't worry. All your problems are going to be fixed. Just tell us what's up. Okay, your name, Pavel? What's your problem? I don't have enough fuel for my tractor. Okay, Pavel will not have enough fuel for his tractor. Anybody else? Pavel? Okay, Pavel too. All right, this guy's Pavel. Yeah, you don't have wood for your fire? Okay, we'll take that down. So whatever, they collect all the complaints. And then later that week, all of the people who complained disappeared in the middle of the night. And they came back and they said, any problems? And it was a utopia after that.
Nobody had any problems.
No more issues, no more problems after that.
Well, it just brings us to an important takeaway, though. I mean, we can talk theoretically all day long about what form of government or what political theory is best, both in the practical sense and the most moral sense, but if you ask the little guy on the ground, he just wants somebody who can keep order.
Yep.
Absolutely nothing else really matters to most people.
Yeah, order and a fair shake if possible, but order is fundamental.
Yeah.
Order is very, very terrifying. And speaking of order, this is the last thing we're going to say is this is how the order that we all grew up in, this is how the order of the last 80 to 100 years was established. Europe's completely destroyed. The Soviet Union, is in ruins. The only industrial power that survived that war was the Americans. And if you wanted to rebuild your country, you were going to need a lot of greenbacks because the America store was the last shop in town that hadn't been bombed out.
And that was before they had shipped all their manufacturing off to China.
Yeah, that was before that. So this is the period of history where the greenback gets established as the world's currency. Mm-hmm. And the reserve currency of the world, and the Americans are now essentially running the show. After this war, everybody else is done, and they, there's the Cold War, but really, America's the last one standing, and that's a big part of why we grew up in the world we did.
Yeah. Well, it's not just that they own the business world; they own the narrative as well now. Up until World War II, European countries still leaned heavily on their centuries of history, but after World War II, everybody's looking at the government in a much more American, progressive, United Nations, what can we work towards point of view. It's hard to believe that the current French government is the government that colonized half of Africa, or the current Dutch government is the government that colonized Indonesia and Malaysia.
Yeah, and that's, guys, going to be it for Radio Free History. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back next week with pulling back the curtain a little more on something different.
Right. Have a good week, guys.